Okay, welcome. My name is Bethany Odell, and I'm going to be talking about social media today. So, I like social media, it's one of my interest areas. And so, when it comes to social media, my preferred social platform would be Instagram. I'm probably on Instagram the most. And then for my news platforms, I prefer to use Facebook, mostly because I've been using Facebook the most, the longest. So, I have a lot of the resources that I've been building up over the years, and organizations, people that I follow. So that's kind of the best place to go and find my news. And then I also like for my research social platform to use YouTube because I like to watch videos. I feel like they're more of my learning style. So I feel like I get more out of them. So we're going to be talking about a lot of different social media platforms today. And so I just wanted to bring up what my favorites are. So if you want to include in the chat what your favorite social media platforms are, that would be awesome. And that will get us talking in the chat as well. So this workshop today is part of the Sundays with a Librarian workshop. And so this is November 1st recording, and it will be recorded and available on our library's YouTube channel. So basically, while we hate to admit it, the majority of us spend quite a bit of time each day on social media. We use Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, TikTok, a lot of different types of platforms to check in with our friends, keep tabs on our favorite brands and celebrities, or just for fun. And what we often don't realize is that we can actually use these resources as research tools. They're not just for entertainment purposes. So this workshop, we're going to talk about how to find credible information and find reliable users to add to our social media platforms. So I like to talk about the information cycle first, which talks about how information starts. So the information cycle basically looks like this, where you have an event, and focusing on that one event, you have different sources, different types of sources that are talking about that specific event. So for example, you might, within the first day or even prior to the event, you will hear about it on the radio, you might hear about it in advertisements, you might hear about it on social media, in the newspapers. Then the week of, or even the day of, after the event, then you would hear it as news sources, more talk about it on social media, and that continues to build up in the source type. So then weeks after, you might start seeing it in your trade magazines, because it takes a little bit longer to publish a trade magazine than it does to publish it in a newspaper versus publishing it on a blog on the internet, so it's almost like the time that it takes to get that information out there. 6 months from now, then you might start seeing it in scholarly journals. Scholarly journals take a little bit longer than a magazine because there's the peer review process that's included in there. And then maybe year or 2 or 3 years later, you'll start to see those materials in books and government documents, encyclopedias, reference materials. It takes a lot longer to get things published in a book because there is the peer review process, but there's a lot more elements, especially if you're getting together an edited series, then you have a lot more authors that you're getting feedback from, that you're getting peer reviewed from. So I also like to talk about scholarship as conversation, which is one of our outcomes at the libraries and archives, which we align with the Association of College and Research Libraries. And so this is just one of our outcomes for research that talks about scholarship as conversation, which is the communities of scholars, researchers, or professionals engaged in sustaining discourse with new insights and discoveries occurring over time as a result of varied perspectives and interpretations. So basically, we're looking at how people interact and engage with content and include their own perspectives and interpretations over a specific topic. So there's a lot of multiple conversations going on a certain topic. It doesn't necessarily have to be scholarly, but when we're looking at this specific outcome, we do focus more on the scholarship and academic area. So let's talk about some examples. I like to look at how social media and the information cycle would work together in a scholarship and conversation kind of way. So for a research topic, I do a lot of research with video games and embedded learning with online environments. And so we're looking at a research topic like how are video games used in education? Unfortunately, a topic like that is a very broad topic. There's books that are published about video game use in education. So for this example, I want to look at something more specific so that I can apply that information cycle. So the question I might be asking is how can elements from MMORPGs like World of Warcraft that are used to engage gamers be applied to higher education to engage learners? And this is actually something that I've spent maybe 3 years researching because I'm very interested in how MMORPGs, which is mass multiplayer online role-playing games like World of Warcraft, Overwatch, Hearthstone, Skyrim, how those games interact with the gamer to make them kind of addicted to playing the game. So those elements used, how can we apply those to education to make students be more engaged in the classroom? So just a side note before we get started, when you're looking at research questions like this, it's really helpful to pull out your search terms. So if you're finding that you're not finding any results when you're looking at databases or on Google Scholar, it's a good idea to just sit down and take a piece of paper, write out your research question, and like circle or highlight your actual terms used in your question. So looking at my question, I wanted to just kind of highlight the search terms here. And we're looking at terms like MMORPG, video games, World of Warcraft. The World of Warcraft community refers to the game as WoW. Higher education, learning, learner engagement. So being familiar with those different terms will help enhance your research, which also will help enhance it when you're doing research with social media, because you want to have that kind of lingo that everyone else is using. So if you're doing a research paper on video games, it's a good idea to know video game terminology. So using that research question, I like to point out that a lot of times when we come up with research questions, we get it from somewhere. We might have seen something on the internet that inspired the research question. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. Or maybe experiences that we have. For me, I'm extremely interested in video games. I have played World of Warcraft for a long, long time. And so I'm interested in applying those elements because of experience. So when you're doing and looking at your research questions, a lot of times they come from somewhere else. And because of our lives are so embedded in the internet and online, it makes sense for a lot of those questions to have come from experiences or things that we have seen on the internet. So for this example that I have, we're looking at the day of looking at news outlets, social media, places that I might have interacted with. And I discovered that World of Warcraft had an expansion come out. And because I wanted to give an entire example of the entire information cycle, we're kind of looking back quite a bit here. So we're looking at BlizzCon 2013, just so I could show you what happens a couple years later with reference materials and academic resources. So if you're thinking that this is a dated example, it's not quite dated. The example still applies to any other example. So here we have an event called BlizzCon 2013. And basically BlizzCon is Blizzard, the gaming company's video game conference or Comic-Con that you might think of. So Blizzard is a gaming company. They created World of Warcraft, Overwatch, Hearthstone, some of those really popular big games that most people are familiar with, even if they're just familiar with the name and they've never played it. So that's Blizzard. And so Blizzard announced in 2013 at BlizzCon that they're going to release a new expansion to World of Warcraft. And World of Warcraft is probably one of the biggest, most successful MMORPG games out there. So as a little example, here is the cover art for Warlords of Draenor, which is the expansion that they decided to release. And on Twitter, we have examples of World of Warcraft actually tweeting about additional information about that expansion pack. And down here, we have the scholarship is conversation, where we have users interacting with the original author, which is World of Warcraft, and talking about that content. So they're engaging with each other about basically the expansion, and what they're talking about here is the leveling cap that they've increased, which now that we're about 5 years later, 7 years later, somewhere like that, we look at that and this actually is not even close to being is where we are right now. So it's kind of funny seeing this from a different perspective. But here we have that engagement and conversation with these different sources, and it's all being held on social media, which is on Twitter. So going back into the information cycle, we're looking at weeks to months later where the expansion has finally come out, it's finally been released, and people are playing it and talking about it. So you have bloggers talking about it, you have streamers on Twitch probably streaming it, maybe not in 2013, but maybe now it would apply to the same example, but to today's world society. So we have a blog right here. Blizzard burned its biggest fans with World of Warcraft, Warlords of Draenor. And this is a blog post that I had found from a gaming platform that I follow on Facebook. So I immediately was interested in it. I clicked on it because I, being a person that did not like this specific expansion, found this to be a really interesting article because it talks about this being one of the most expensive expansions that came out with the lowest amount of additional content included. So that's another engagement with social media on a different platform and a different resource type. This is a blog, this is a journalist. And then going even further, we're looking at years later where we're actually finally getting into the academic resources. And so this could be months to years later. And we have an article here, Social Game Elements in World of Warcraft, Interpersonal Relations, Groups and Organizations for Gamification Design. This is an article that talks about World of Warcraft elements specifically. And then here we have a book that was published, Graduate Skills and Game-Based Learning Using Video Games for Employability in Higher Education. And in this book, there's an entire chapter dedicated to the use of World of Warcraft and elements that World of Warcraft uses for engagement. So we're finally getting to the point where I'm finding resources that actually relate to my original research topic. So hopefully that kind of shows how the information cycle works, how events turn into being published into academic journals, and that you can see how the social media platforms can help encourage that research along the way. So how do you use social media for research specifically? You want to get your voice out there, and that's really what social media is the best for. Social media allows users to share links to articles, web pages, blog posts, videos, photos, and all kinds of media types. And so we respond more to visual content, especially now more than ever, which is why infographics, GIFs, memes are so popular. So because you can share that, you can get your research out there so much quicker. You can actually engage with your users, your fans, your followers, however you want to look at it, and get their feedback on your research or on your research topics. And one of the best places to use Twitter for is actually engaging your followers and asking them for questions that you might have had to do an entire survey and get a whole poll of people together and if you put on Twitter, I mean, they're already there. The people that are like-minded, or maybe they just like you, they think you're funny, and they're more committed to helping you than finding somebody out randomly on the streets to help you. So people can publish their ideas so much easier on social media. There's not really a fact checker or portal that approves any of this stuff. So instead of waiting for publishers to accept work, professionals can actually publish their content and share it via social media. So that has changed the publishing world so much, especially with self-publishing, because authors now have Twitter accounts and Instagram accounts, and so they're sharing and promoting their own work without having to have a publisher or agent involved. Now, are they as successful? Not all of them, but there are definitely authors out there that have been very successful with using social media to get their content out there. And I'm just not just talking about, fiction writers or anything. I'm talking about actual academic scholars. And so what we have to be aware of is that not everyone that publishes things on the internet is considered credible or is considered a professional. And if you're interested in where this kind of gets in more with fake news, we have a workshop on this workshop series about fake news where I cover that. And also there is IT is doing a part of their cybersecurity month. They're talking about fake news and just making sure that you're finding credible information. So this is where that kind of comes in, and we have to be cautious about what we're using. So I like to talk about Twitter because it's probably the easiest one to access without getting an account. With Instagram, a lot of times you have to have an account. Facebook is getting better where you can look at things without being logged in, but in order to engage with it, it's a little bit harder. So for the most of this example, I want to talk mostly about Twitter, but the elements I'm going to talk about and the different steps, they can still apply to Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, YouTube, really any platform. So Twitter specifically has 330 million active monthly users. That pretty much boils down to 145 million active daily users. So almost everybody has Twitter, it seems like. Who uses Twitter? Anyone can use Twitter. You don't have to be a special somebody to be allowed to be on Twitter. There's definitely people out in the world that should not have Twitter, and I know that Twitter does block certain people, but for the most part, I mean, if you just did a poll with all your friends, you would be surprised at how many don't have a Twitter actually. So looking at Twitter as a platform for research, you want to look for institutions, you want to look for organizations, and you want to look for credible people, credible authors. So as you're doing your research, keep in mind of the sources that are being cited in the actual academic journals that you are looking at. Look for those authors. Do they have their own Twitter page? What do they talk about on Twitter? What organizations are promoting this research? And if there's institutions, a lot of educational higher ed institutions post content like this. So for my example, I wanted to talk a little bit more closer to home here. We're talking about Emporia State. So our library has a Twitter. Mostly our Twitter focuses on promoting workshops that we have that are available. Their Emporia State University has a official Twitter page, and it posts everything. Anything that is connected to the university. They retweet some of our workshops. They talk about, some of the sorority and fraternities on campus. So that's kind of like the larger parent Twitter of all of the small ones that we have on campus. You have organizations. So we have the Community Hornets, that is for Hornets that want to do community service and do better on campus and help serve the community. And then you have the Eat Emporia at the Table initiative, the food insecurity initiative that's going around on campus the last year and a half or so. So they have their own Twitter pages, and those are organizations that are technically separate from Emporia State. I don't want to get into like the logistics, I guess, of it, but they can have their own Twitter page because they have their own mission statement. They have their own goals and purposes. And then looking at credible people, the Emporia State University president, Allison Garrett, she has a Twitter page. And one of my favorite, Dr. Jasmine Linnerberry, she works in the Department of Communication and Theater. She is a phenomenal person, but she has a Twitter of her own that we're going to kind of talk about in an example coming up. So let's say that your research example that you're looking at, you've changed your question and you've decided to look into food insecurity as your research topic. So your question might be, how are college students or institutions dealing with food insecurity? So just looking at that on Twitter here, I have a couple of different posts that I want to point out. So over here we have the Eat Emporia at the Table, which is the actual organization that is putting together research and information about food insecurity at Emporia State. And so here they are talking about Corky's Cupboard and the resources that are available with Corky's Cupboard. You have Dr. Jasmine Linnerberry here, who is promoting Can COVID, which is kind of a spinoff of Can the Bods that we usually do. And so Can COVID is what we're doing here in 2020. And so she's sharing that as well with some of the hashtags that would be really popular for if you wanted to do additional research. I think specifically the one here, she is tagging the EAT initiative, which is this Twitter here, the Emporia at the Table. And then of course you have ESU's Association of Student Governance, and they're sharing the same tweet, which is being retweeted by Allison Garrett, the president of Emporia State University. So that tells you right away that there are some credible resources. The president of the university is obviously credible because she's the president. She has these resources available to her that she's promoting. You have Dr. Jasmine Linnerberry, who is the co-founder of the Emporia at the Table Eat initiative. And so, of course, she would definitely be a credible source to this content here. And so they kind of are all building off of each other. Now, maybe you don't get all of that background information right away from looking at these Twitter feeds. I get that because I know how this works, having worked with the initiative. So I know kind of how those layers work. But I think that as you're reading through these tweets, and if you're obviously following them, eventually you would catch on to those other little minor details. So you want to be aware of fake news, though. Fake news is everywhere, and it is definitely on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook. And so we need to be really careful about what we are seeing, even if we think that it is credible. I think the example that I have here is really kind of interesting with the elections coming up, because here we have people posting about how the 3 red banners, I think they're calling it banners, not bars, the 3 red banners are connected to socialism. I think that was what I was reading. Yeah, socialists. And they're basically implying that Joe Biden is promoting socialism because of his banners and that kind of stuff. So here you have people who are even getting retweeted by some of their followers and even getting likes. Like this one has 196 likes, this one has 45. So they're sharing and then just spreading that fake news around. So how do you know if something is fake or not? Well, there's a lot of resources that help you evaluate if the content is true or not. And one of my favorite places to get fact checking is Snoops. And I talk about this in my fake news workshop. So if you're more interested in that, we'll link it somewhere, or it is available on our YouTube channel. But just an overview of how Snoops works is here we see the Snoops article that is addressing the question, is Biden's logo a reference to China's 3 red banners, and what the claim is, and that it is false. And the nice thing is I saw this because it's on Twitter and I follow them on Twitter. So I saw this pop up and what their claim was, and that they already marked it as false. So if you were doing a search on the 3 banners, and unfortunately they didn't hashtag it here, so I don't know how people would find it as easily, but I did find it when I just did a search for the 3 banners in Twitter. So it does pop up, and that you would eventually be reading through, and then you see that there's actually content that's saying that it's not true. I wanted to talk a little bit about Snoops here in this conversation because I wanted to pull up their kind of, it's not really terms of agreements, but kind of basically how they work. And so here we have their statement for how they start their research, that they typically try to contact the original source when they are doing their research for fact checking, but then also that they attempt to use peer-reviewed journals, government agency statistics, and things like that are more of a higher credibility than just finding a blog on the internet, so that they're using credible resources when they are sharing how and why it's not true, or if it is true. So of course, don't forget to cite your research. I think that is one of the biggest problems that we see with social media, because we think when we're doing research that our research implies books and news articles and academic journals, that we don't think that just because we saw it on social media that we have to cite it. That is wrong. If you see anything and you're sharing anybody else's information, you should always cite. And if you're not sure if you should be citing it, then go ahead and cite. I mean, you can always just be wrong rather than right, or right rather than wrong, or something like that. So I have some examples of what it looks like to cite a social media like tweet in APA and MLA, and you can kind of see that the basic is you have your username, that is the main focus, the tweet itself, and then the date that is being shared. I think that with MLA, it's interesting that they also want to see the time, which can come in handy if you're looking at somebody who posts multiple times a day, such as people in politics right now that really love to be on Twitter. If you're never sure how to cite something, one of my favorite resources for citing in MLA and APA is Excelsior Online Writing Lab. There's a lot of examples, and they're the most current with the 7th edition and 8th edition. So 7th edition APA, 8th edition MLA, but also you can chat with a librarian at ESU. So we have a chat on our homepage, and if you just go into that chat, you can copy and paste your citation into that and say, I'm trying to figure out how to cite this social media post from Twitter. Can you help me? Is this correct? How is it incorrect? And we walk you through that. And our library GAs are also trained. So really anybody that monitors that chat is trained in understanding how to find the information to help you. I think the other really big thing that we see with social media and sharing things on social media is we get content where it's just passed around so rapidly that we lose sight of the original source itself. And that's really frustrating as somebody who is a content creator and is sharing their content on those social platforms. And so here is an example that I use that I actually found on my own Facebook page, where this is a user that posted this Dollar General deal. If you're interested in couponing, I'm kind of interested in couponing, so a very large majority of my Facebook content is couponing stuff. But here is a post where the person just basically said NMP, which means not my post. And they didn't give any credit to the original source. They didn't even mention the original source. I like that they basically are like, I didn't make this, but they didn't share who did. And that's very frustrating because then you don't know, if you found this to be helpful, how do you follow that person? How do you know to say thank you? How do you know if they're even a good source to follow? So because I follow so many of these users though, on my Instagram, I actually had I followed this actual person that did create this, and I was able to find the original source. So sometimes it's really hard to find the original source of a resource on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, on all those, because people just share it. Sometimes they even copy it, save it to their phone, and then upload it instead of sharing it directly from the original source. So I shared this bit of information because I really hope that you strongly consider how you are sharing your content on your social media. I know it's really tempting to just download the picture, share, save it to your phone, and then upload it as your own. Even if you're saying it's not your post, I feel like it's so much more ethical and kinder to just share it from the original person so that they still get the credit, they still get the views, they still get the content, and they get the followers for people that are finding this information. So that is basically everything that I have about social media. I mean, there's so many elements and things to talk about, but this is supposed to be a short workshop series. So I wanted to keep it pretty brief and just focusing on the elements of how you would search. So if you have questions or you want me to dig deeper, I can do one-shot appointments and talk about, using Instagram or using YouTube or even Pinterest. My email is right here, and this is my phone number. And I will stay in the chat for about 5 more minutes if you would like to ask any questions to follow up with, or if we're having a conversation right now so that we can continue and finish out the conversation. So thank you for joining me today, and these are my sources.